Shalom. So this is our final session of the series on Zen and the spiritual exercises, and so just recouping and looking at where we have come from and where we are and where we're going from here on after walking this journey, taking these two spiritual paths in mutual light to see what we might be able to learn. Many of us are already engaged in one path or the other, and I know a good number of you are in the Zen path, and some who are Christian may have heard about spiritual exercises of Ignatius in your own way. And so what we have offered for this lecture series is a way of deepening our own spiritual path under the light of these two traditional paths that have been offered, one in the Eastern Hemisphere and now part of the Western spiritual landscape, and the other one in medieval, or rather just post-medieval Catholic Europe that came to influence a lot of Christian culture in the West, and it's now also being taken as a worldwide source of spiritual paths, Christian and by Christians of different denominations, and also increasingly by non-Christians, namely the spiritual exercises of Ignatius. And I was inspired to offer this kind of lecture series based on my own experience of how these two paths were very central in my own life and in my own journey, and which I continue to cherish and I continue to learn about. And a concrete way in which these two merged in my own path after having sat in this way for about 10 or so years myself was shortly after my ordination as a Jesuit priest in 1978. I was invited by a group of missionary priests in the Philippines to offer a 30-day Ignatian retreat, Zen style, to the seminarians who are about to get ordained. So I accepted this invitation and was at a sister's convent that had a retreat house attached to it in Tagaytay, Philippines. And there was a Good Shepherd sister who had also been sitting in Zen for a good number of years, who was willing to become a co-director of that retreat, Sister Rosario Batung. So both of us co-directed this group of about a dozen Philippine seminarians preparing for ordination and for being sent to missions in different places internationally as well as in the Philippines. So that was my first opportunity to see how these two paths could be integrated in a way that they could be offered in guiding others. Before that, I had about first 10 years practicing, or rather 7 or 8 years in the tradition of the spiritual exercises as a Jesuit, having entered in the early 60s and then being sent to Japan. 1 year after being sent there in 1971, I encountered Zen, and so continued with my Ignatian exercises on an annual basis, but now with Zen as a component of my spiritual path for 7 or 8 years, and then I was ordained in 1976. And so it was about 1978 when, or 79 when this retreat was offered. So in that light, what I had received in this path that involved these two paths was something I was beginning to crystallize in my own way. And so the retreat talks were recorded and then later transcribed when I came here to Perkins, and they remained in rough draft, very, very rough draft for a good number of years, until about 5 or 6 years ago when I had an opportunity to look over them and re-edit them, and of course added new reflections based on the years of continuing to offer guidance in Zen with a good number of those who came to Maria Cannon Zen Center who were also Christian. So in that regard, this book became the crystallization of all of those blessings that came into my life. So now, basically, there is a journey that we're invited to take, and the spiritual exercises is a very, very well mapped out path with different stages that Ignatius himself went through, which he was able to note down and put explicitly in the exercises as stages of the path that the exercitant, he calls the practitioner, undergoes. Now, Zen itself has a way of mapping its own journey toward deepening in different ways. One of them is the so-called 10 ox-herding pictures, different stages of the Zen life, beginning with the stage of asking questions, seeking for the ox, beginning to ask for what the meaning of my life is, and so on, and then seeing traces of the ox and actually sighting the ox, not clearly yet, but somewhere out there, and then beginning to catch the ox, and then taming the ox, trying to live with the ox, domesticating the ox, being more comfortable with the ox, and so on, and then finally, after really being one with the ox in one's life, forgetting about the ox, and then living fully in the marketplace. So it is a map of the Zen life with this pattern of 10 stages of stages of deepening with a relationship with an ox, a very mysterious ox that is presented in this set of pictures as one way. And then when we look at the Ignatian exercises, we see the stages of purification, which is the first week, where we are called to grapple with the fact that we are so separate from that which we feel we need to be, namely to live fully, to live wholly, and to live at peace within ourselves. In Christian terms, we are in a state of sin, a state of alienation, separation from our true selves made in the image of God. And so we need to really take stock of that, have a change of heart, and then take a path that will be more in consonance with what the will of God is in our lives. And so we follow the way as given to us by the way God, in God's own way, has shown us through the embodiment of the divine life in this human being, Jesus of Nazareth, who is also understood in the Christian tradition to be the manifestation, the full manifestation of God on this earth, the incarnation of God on this earth. So in looking at Jesus, we get a glimpse of how to live the way. So that's what the second part of the exercises is about, following the way by beholding, by contemplating the life of Jesus and seeing how God is showing us how to be fully human in the way that Jesus was fully human, so that we can that we can attain our true ultimate goal to become one with God. And that involves not only the day-to-day acts that we undertake, it also involves a total surrender of ourselves, in the way that Jesus came to a stage of his life where he really was faced with this decision of whether to escape from the death that was consigned to him because of the consequences of what his words and what his actions did to the prevailing society, which was to challenge the conventions of that society, which were which precisely were dehumanizing and which were also oppressive and so on, religiously as well as socially and politically. And in challenging those ways, he became a subversive, and so in accepting that faith, surrendering to that faith, surrendering to the will of God, he died, was killed, and that surrender of self is what led to the newness of life, that led to the birth of the small group of disciples that became his followers, and to the outpouring of grace based on what was given on Pentecost, the day in which the Holy Spirit was poured out. And that's where Ignatius's vision of the fourth week, the life in the risen one, enlightened by the Holy Spirit, is brought to us as the fourth stage of the exercises. And in that fourth stage, the culminating point of the exercises is this exercise which we saw last time called the Contemplation on Divine Love. And the point of that is to simply sit and behold the fact that we are steeped in that divine love in all aspects of our life, in all aspects of our being. Beginning with beholding things around us like wood, pebbles, rivers, mountains, inanimate objects in the Aristotelian gradation of being. And then comes the animate objects, plants, flowers, grass, trees, and then the next level, other sentient beings like Pepe, Max, or the bugs around here and so on, or all non-human animals. And then finally, or rather not finally, but then the stage of human beings, seeing in each of these modes of being precisely a special and distinctive way in which divine love is being manifested and being embodied and being activated. And then of course Ignatius talks about the angels in their own way, a manifestation of divine love through their intellect and through their clarity and through their guidance in compassion of all other beings who are not in the light as they are and so forth. And then finally, in looking at the hierarchy of being, seeing how everything is suffused in divine love, we realize that we are always suffused in that same love, and so our life is now no longer lived for my own little ambition, for my own little self-fulfillment, but really lived in the light of celebrating that love in gratitude. And the life that Ignatius puts forth as one that is the fruit of having gone through the exercises is one that can be described as the life of a contemplative in action. So that would be our main theme for today. What does it mean to be a contemplative in action? And to put it in Zen terms, what is it to be to live a life of Zen? And again, Zen may not use the word contemplation in its regular vocabulary. We rather use the word meditation. So in the West, we need to make a conceptual distinction, but because when we use meditation, we are reminded of what Descartes wrote when he was trying to figure out whether things exist after all and so on. And so it was a more analytic kind of approach. So he has this series of philosophical musings that he has entitled Meditations. And so in the West, that is the implication of that term meditation. But in the Buddhist context, meditation is not that. It is not discursive reasoning or analytic thinking at all, but precisely a way of just stopping the activity of the mind, shamatha, and beholding what is, vipassana. So what we call meditation in the Buddhist tradition is really stopping the activities of the mind and allowing the inner eye to see things as they are. So in that regard, what is used as meditation in Buddhist context roughly corresponds to what, not only roughly, but very much corresponds to what in Western tradition is called contemplation. And contemplation comes from the Latin word contemplatio, which itself comes from the Greek word theorein, which is to see, to behold, to see things. Again, that became manifested in another English term which deflected it a little bit. The word theory comes from theorein, but it's not so much a theoretical and therefore analytic and discursive account of things, but more of how you see things. Your theory is, from the original Greek, how you see something. So, to see. Basically, contemplatio is to see, or rather in an English term, it's to behold. There is a book that I have recently been introduced to, which I have not read fully, by a person named Maggie Ross, and she uses this term, beholding, as a term for Christian prayer, Christian contemplation, to behold. And I feel that that captures what the contemplative practice is all about in its basic basic sense of beholding with the eyes of the heart. And so if you see it in that way, contemplatio, to be a contemplative, to contemplate, is exactly what is being pointed to by the term shamatha vipassana, to see, to stop the activities of the mind and therefore to see. So what does it mean to live as a contemplative? And then Ignatius says, in action. I would like to relate this notion of the contemplative in action to the words that are given by Paul in the Epistle to the Thessalonians, when he says, there are three things that I invite you to take on as now that you have heard the good news as Christians. Pray always, give thanks, or rather, first, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and give thanks in all things, for this is the will of God for you in Jesus Christ. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 16 to 18. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all things. So those three things, that inner joy, always being in a state of prayer. So we'll look at that in relation to our task for today, to understand what contemplation is. And thirdly, give thanks in all things. How can we give thanks in all things when there are some times when we're messed up, or things get difficult, or things are thrown in our way that are difficult to be grateful for, and yet the injunction, the invitation remains. Pray, be thankful in all things. In all things give thanks. Is that an attitude that we can take, no matter what? Or is it only when some things are good, then we can be thankful, and when things are bad, then we curse, or we say an expletive? No, it says, be thankful in all things. Give thanks in all things. So that's the attitude that naturally follows from the first and second. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing. So what does pray without ceasing entail? It's not just talking, praying as talking to God, or talking to the divine, or communicating, even in that sense. But I would take it precisely in a more fundamental sense of a way of being in communion with the divine in one's life, a way of being always open to the holy, a way of being that 24/7 constantly is what at home where it is called to be, no matter what. It's not just taking a part of your day and you sit half an hour and that's the time you can call your holy time, your prayer time, when you do the holy things. And then you do the secular things where you go to your grocery store and get your groceries, prepare your food, or go to work and so on. So for such a person who has seen what it means to just be in communion always, no matter what you do, whether you're awake or you're asleep or you're in activity or you're actually taking time to just be still and behold, it's that same act of being in communion. What is it to be in communion? To really behold what is for what it is, as it is, no matter what. So how can we cultivate this attitude of contemplation in our own lives? So this is the summit now of the exercises, and what we are contemplating on is no other than divine love. The fact that each and everything in our that surrounds us in our being, whether it be the inanimate things around us or the plants, the more animate, the animate aspects of creation, or other animals, or human beings, or other beings that whose existence we may not know of, we're all suffused in that same reality that Ignatius calls divine love. So he invites us. Consider that. Do you see that in your own life? Zen does not use the term divine love. There is no term that is just equivalent to that. But what Zen opens us to is a sense of amazement, a sense of wonder, a sense of mystery at each and everything. Zen has its own terms on the Buddhist tradition, like Buddha nature, true self, emptiness, Dharmakaya, and so on. But those are really just crystallized technical terms for basically that sense of amazement that our heart is open to when we realize every moment is a gratuitous gift. And so this practice of being still and beholding enables us to realize it as such. So I would like to cite words of a Jewish prophet of the 20th century, which I also mentioned in a talk in our Zen gathering yesterday, Abraham Joshua Heschel, in describing what a spiritual path is all about. Abraham Joshua Heschel has many books, of course, and he's known for his very prophetic stance in American society when he walked with Martin Luther King for racial equality, when he also spoke on behalf of justice and stood on the side of the oppressed and so on, and really voiced out the conscience of the human beings who were seeking true equality, justice, and a sense of a humane society from his Jewish perspective. And so he was able to resonate with Christians, non-religious people, Muslims, and others of any religious tradition or no religious tradition in voicing out these deep aspirations of the human being. And among his many writings, there is one that struck me and so many others as really indicative of something we can really find as a common ground for our own questing about the point of it all. He has this quotation that I would like to bring to our attention as a way of summarizing what being a contemplative in action entails. This is a quote that goes, "Our goal should be to live life in radical amazement. Get up in the morning and look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. Never treat life casually. To be spiritual is to be amazed. To be amazed. Always." Another, so somebody brings a glass of water. Oh, okay, water from the tap. That's fine. Thank you. Taking it for granted. But that very act itself, what it entails, the fact that there is that water, where it comes from, and the fact that it's what my body needs precisely to quench its thirst and so on right at that moment. All of these things that are so ordinary, we tend to treat them casually and take them for granted. But Abraham Joshua Heschel reminds us, just open your eyes always and continue to be amazed. So, to be amazed. And so I mentioned yesterday also in my Zen talk that if that is what to be spiritual is, then that's precisely a way of expressing what the Zen life is all about. Zen is to be amazed. And if we relate it to what we are looking at, what does it mean to be a contemplative in action? It is to live in that constant amazement, moment to moment, at everything that happens, whether it be something pleasant, something that soothes, something that gives me refreshment, and something that makes me leap for joy, or something that shocks me and makes me sad or hurt or angry even sometimes. To live in that state of total openness, to be surprised, and out of that comes a heart that can only well up in gratitude. So that is a life of a contemplative that I would like to put forth. How can we arrive at that mode of life? How has Ignatius guided us so far? Well, he has asked us in the prelude of the exercises, first consider the purpose for which you were made. And so the first part of our exercises, the first 2 or 3 sessions, we asked ourselves, what is the purpose of my life? So we had our discussions with different angles into that. The purpose of my life is to be a good person, to be a good father, to be a good mother, or to be a good citizen, or and so forth. And but asking the question may have its own pitfalls in that we already presuppose a purpose and end kind of thing, and I think Bill pointed that out properly, that this is a trick question itself, and it may lead us into a sidetracking of the matter at hand. So rather than asking the question, perhaps it is better to just keep that question in an implicit way in whatever we do. How does this tally with my overall ultimate goal in life? You could say the word goal. And so Abraham Joshua Heschel uses that word, and since it is something that is part of our vocabulary, he says our goal should be to live life in radical amazement. Not something other than itself, but really, if you talk about goal, it's simply to live always amazed, not as something that is not there yet, something that you need to attain after working through it, working for it, not something that somebody from outside will give you through some gift based on your own merit or without your own merit, but really to change the way you live, change the way you see things in a way that you see it's already there, to live in radical amazement. So Ignatius invites us, what is the goal of my life? Notwithstanding the discussions we had, it's simply asking, well, what's the point of it all? Principle and foundation. And so he says, well, it's to serve, reverence, and praise God so as to attain infinite life. Paraphrasing. To praise, reverence, and serve God, and in so doing, attain the fullness of life. And so what is that fullness of life? What does it mean to serve, praise, reverence? And so we consider that, and as we recall, what we looked at was basic things in our day-to-day life. How do you attain your ultimate purpose? How do you praise, reverence, and serve God when you're washing the dishes? Or how do you praise, reverence, and serve God when you're walking the dog out in the yard? Or how do you praise, reverence, and serve God when you're mowing the lawn? Or how do you praise, reverence, and serve God when you are taking a glass of water? Each and every act of ours in its ordinariness can be seen as precisely the summit, the fulfillment of our goal in life. Hi, Pepe. Did you get that? Okay. See, he is living his goal in life. Remember that question, does the dog have good nature? He knows. Exactly. So to be a contemplative in action is to really come to that point where we are at home and we are totally amazed. Each and everything. Now, the contemplative attitude. But now, how about in action? What does this action entail? What kinds of actions, well, thoughts, words, and actions included, are called for in our world today, as in worlds of our generations? There is a saying that is used by many who are invited to be graduation speakers or commencement speakers about what a young person who really is looking at being there to serve the world may take as a guide. So there's a saying that goes in paraphrase, your calling is where the needs of the world meet your own passion. whatever passion you feel you have in living, what gives you joy in living, whether it's music or arts or figuring out certain machinations that the engineer does, or figuring out certain economic policies that help people in a more fruitful economic life and so on. Whatever you find fulfilling for you, meeting what the world needs. So look for that meeting place of your own inner passion and the world's needs. So now we're looking at the world's needs, and the world's needs are so many. And basically, it can be summed up in one word. The Beatles knew it. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. Well, joking aside, the world is hurting in so many ways. The world is wounded. There are wars going on all over, military and other forms of violence. Human beings are imposing on one another. There's structural violence, children hungry, dying by the tens of thousands. There is the ecological disaster that we're all facing unless we change radically the way we live on earth. So much violence. So how can my passion be lived in a way that I can offer some kind of alleviation to that violence, to that hurt of the world? So that's the question now that each one of us needs to consider in our own lives. To be a contemplative, to be amazed always, and out of that amazement to give thanks, to be grateful for all of these blessings. And at the same time, not just to go into a solipsistic way of just jumping up and down, yes, I'm amazed, it's all a wonder and so on, and neglecting what the world is calling us on, or calling on us to respond to. And so when we are truly open and we really are connected to the world, that amazement is also very much in harmony with exactly what the world is calling us to do. So how can we respond to the world in living our own passion in a way that meets the world's needs? So it could be whatever occupation we may find, but it need not be just confined to occupation or profession. It would be simply being there for one another. Being there in a way that I could walk with somebody who is asking questions in a way that might be a companion along the way, or being there to just offer a glass of water, or some word of comfort, or whatever way my being, wherever I am, can be directed in a way that I am at the service of others. The Jesuit motto, which they keep repeating to the students at Jesuit High School, is to be a man for others. Well, they're all male. It's a male high school, so they use man for others. But to see it as a human expression, to be a person for others, no longer for myself. Because I have now found what I'm looking for in life, namely this sense of amazement at everything that happens, which wells up in gratitude. We've come home, if we're able to say that. So welcome home, everyone. Find that. If you're not yet there, then you know that there's a way. So continue taking Ignatius as a hint, or maybe your Zen practice as a hint, and continue your journey home until you are able to arrive and say, yes, I see what that is. That's what I would like to live also. Right now, I'm beginning right now. And in doing so, then, in being at home, we can now open our home and be there to welcome all in hospitality. Be so open-hearted that now the world is what I welcome in my being. Not so much in grandiose terms as now I'm going to save the world, but just in being myself, and whatever situation comes to me, then it's the world that then knocks on my door, and I'm always there available to open whatever way I am called to. And then we can turn back always to the second week of the exercises and again behold how Jesus the way related to others as the manifestation of divine love on earth. First, realizing that to live as Jesus lived is to really realize, first and foremost, what he heard when he was baptized in the Jordan. You are my beloved, in whom I'm well pleased. So to be at home somehow entails that confidence that I am too beloved of the universe, unconditionally. So I have all the love that I can ever need because it's right here with me, being poured out into me. Even as I sit here doing nothing, it's already given to me. That's the message that Jesus also conveys to us. You are beloved of the same source that I am. I am. Whether you're Christian or not, whether you believe in the doctrines of Catholic Church or different version in a Protestant denomination, that same message is there for us to listen to, and somehow in the silence we may hear it in one way or other. Just to be here is to be unconditionally okay, accepted. Paul Tillich, you are accepted just as you are. And so Jesus found that sense of being beloved as the powerhouse, the power source of his whole life and mission of giving himself back to others. So now we can be a person for others, knowing that we have all that we can ever need, and we can always turn to access that source. How? Take a deep breath and just stop your grasping and see. So we turn to the Buddha again. Stop and see. So Jesus and the Buddha are always there pointing the way to us. Stop and see, and you will know you are beloved. And so with that, know that in being beloved, you may come to situations where you may have to give up all the things that you may be holding on to or cherishing or clinging to, the gift of your own life for others, in whatever situation that may be. It may be a small situation of just giving up your seat on a bus or on a train because you know that some other person is in need of that. Or it could be some more grand gift wherein your whole life truly is given up in some way that you may not be able to foresee yet. But if you are disposed to that, if you're ready for that, then the gift is there, waiting to be taken. And what is the outcome of that? Fullness of life, life in abundance. Out of the gift of life, more life comes. And that's the assurance of the fourth week, the resurrection. So I've given you all the contours of the Ignatian exercises and seen it in the light of the way of Zen, as also as pointed to by the Buddha. And it comes down to that sense of amazement that oozes forth in gratitude, but also disposes me to just give my life back as a gift toward the healing of the wounds of the world, to be a contemplative in action. So that's what we are called to undertake from here on as our way of expressing the answer to the question, what is my goal in life? We can express it in those grandiose terms, or we can say, well, just being who I am. And just being who I am is precisely so rich in all of those implications of what we have just seen, and not just I'll be what I am and you be what you are, and everything will be fine with the world. If that's the way it is, no, it won't be fine. We'll all be fragmented and each one will just go their own way. But if we really go our own way deeply, we realize we're connected to one another right there, deep at the core of all our beings. So let us continue to walk this path in a way that that discovery of where we're connected always opens our eyes and gives us joy and becomes a source of gratitude. So it's a way of eternal celebration of our being together. And our task in life, if there's anything in particular that we can say, is to just share the good news to one another. Hey, you too, you are also beloved. Maybe if you say it that way, they'll take you for a strange weirdo. What is this? But if we know, if we're confident in that, we will know the right words in which we can convey to somebody, not using any words at all, or by just a clasp of a hand and just an affirmation, or just a greeting to a grocery clerk, oh, how are you today? Oh, you must have had a long day, and so on. Not in a kind of a condescending way, but really try seeking to connect with that person and affirming that person in our hearts, and so on. And in that way, then, if we can all live in that way, what a different world this would be. Thank you, Pepe, for that affirmation. I appreciate that. And I'd like to conclude with that word, Pepe. Thank you. So,